Doesn't hurt.
Okay, so pull up my notes here. So go on the case discussion. I didn't notice this before, but it asks if anyone wants to share a spiritual thought, scripture, or gospel thought that anybody's been considering. Does anybody want to dive into that, or if not, we can. That's okay.
I can share a scripture.
Sure.
Just from my religion homework that I've been studying is in Alma 32, talking about the seed and planting the seed of faith in us and planting that word and experimenting upon that word. I really like verse 37 in chapter 32, and it says this, "And behold, as a tree beginneth to grow, you will say, let us nourish it with great care, and it will get root, and it may grow up and bring forth fruit unto us. And now behold, if you nourish it with much care, it will get root and grow up and bring forth fruit." So I just focused on that nourishing part and how important it is to nourish the Word of God. Important it is to continue to study your scriptures, continue to nourish it, continue to go to church. And when you do that, you have a strong foundation and you're able to bring forth great fruits.
Awesome. Thank you. Anybody have any thoughts on it?
I think that's cool. It makes me think of the analogy of like if you park your car like on an upward hill, not park it, just like stop your car. If you don't keep moving, you're going to fall down. So you can't just stop and pause. You have to keep nourishing it and keep going. You can't just be like, oh, I'll wait a few weeks, because it makes a difference and you kind of see yourself start to fall and not feel quite so, I don't know, you don't feel the spirit as much as you pause on things, but you have to keep up on it and keep nourishing it.
So true. So true.
Thank you. Okay, well, let's jump into the discussion then. One of the first things it asks us to discuss is kind of the regular business plan model, talking about customer value proposition, the go-to-market plan, technology and operations strategy, and the cash flow formula. So if we want to start with the customer value proposition, what in this case, in the cake business model, what was the customer valuation proposition that we thought they were kind of leaning towards?
From what I saw,
go for it.
Go for it, Nate.
Okay. From reading the case, the first thing that I recognized was that he looked at people around him, kind of what people his same age were interested in. And he narrowed that down to, okay, people are interested in family and they have their hobbies and they really like social media. And then based off of what he saw their interests being, then he decided, let's build a business around that. So figured, well, people are also really interested in their finances and investing. And so why don't we go ahead and link social media with investment? And then that was the foundation for his business plan.
Perfect. Thanks. Did y'all have any other thoughts on that, or was it pretty much the same thing?
I think it was pretty much the same thing, just making investing easier and using social media. That's pretty much what I got.
Yeah.
Me as well.
Yes, agreed. It's kind of the same idea. And so moving on to the go-to-market plan, and if I may be incorrect in what I'm about to say, because I may not have a full understanding of a go-to-market plan. But essentially the idea was we're going to take, like Nathan said, we're going to combine social networking and investing. And so what they had when they actually went out they've kind of had their MVP, their minimum viable product. And basically they had the social network platform and they had some partnerships with some investment firms. And it was really limited when they went to the market. And so they realized that they probably needed to have more to go along with that. And now I feel like now I'm kind of jumbling or not really being super clear, but did anybody else see anything different than with what they took to the market initially? Aside from that basic social network with the limited number of the investment companies.
It's just looking at the product or the service that they were marketing. I would say it was underdeveloped by the time that TechCrunch rolled around, which of course was the goal date. I wish they wanted to have everything prepared. They had a workable product, but I think they had only linked the website to like 7 or 8 different financial institutions, and so that caused a lot of problems when consumers would get on there and try to link their new accounts with these financial institutions and realize that they couldn't do so. So they had a working product, but it wasn't exactly what it should have been when they launched it at TechCrunch.
Right. Yes, agreed. And that's kind of what I was leaning towards, is that they had something. They were able to go to the market with something. It just wasn't up to the standard that they wanted. And so I think that really hurt them in the beginning when they started out. And that kind of leads into their technology and operations strategy, is they wanted this idea to work to link together all of the investments that people can make, all of the different firms, and see what other companies were, or what other investments were being made and what was going well for other people. And it just didn't work as well as they wanted right out of the gate. As far as their cash flow formula, they had the 3 ideas for getting some revenue, basically. So they had the advertising and lead generation with the sponsorship fees, their premium service, and then licensing fees. So licensing out their service to other investment firms like Charles Schwab and E-Trader and things like that. So just, let's see. With knowing what their business model was, they want us to discuss, do we think it was doomed from the beginning, or did they have, I mean, before we found out that they kind of had a slow start, that like their initial business plan, do we think it would have been successful, or was it just doomed from the beginning? What are your thoughts on that?
They probably didn't prepare enough. They didn't have well enough of a strategy beforehand to get too much success. So if maybe they had like more of the business before just like jumping into it, might have helped.
I felt the same thing that you did, Madison, because I was looking at the time and they started thinking and planning for it. When was it? Let me look at the numbers. They started doing the preparation from the end of 2005 to when they kickstarted it in February 2006. So that only gives them like 3, 4, 5, 6 months maybe to prepare and to really get things organized. And I think if they would have taken more time and really sat out and prepared, they wouldn't have faced all the complications and all the difficulties that they did face. So I think from the way they went about it, I think they were kind of doomed in a way, because lack of preparation, lack of research. There's some other things that go into it as well. We'll probably touch on a little bit later, but I'm kind of leaning towards more of that side. It's kind of a difficult market. They weren't sure exactly who they were targeting, and then they ended up targeting mostly male and different things like that. So that's the way I'm kind of leaning towards right now.
Okay.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to say. Some of the factors that you brought up, such as not giving themselves enough time to fully develop the product, not taking the time to raise as much financial capital as would be needed for a successful company, not taking the time to fully understand that consumers weren't looking for a way to connect with others and share their advice and get advice from others about their investment decisions. There were, of course, a lot of unforeseen factors that really created problems for Steve and his team, like the recession. He probably couldn't have seen that coming in 2008. He made an interesting point in the reflections section, saying that sometimes just because you have a good business idea doesn't mean that it can be transformed into a good business. And so it was something that was new, something that was complicated to get consumers to understand. And so there were definitely some things that proved to be problematic in the long run. But the hard thing was they didn't realize these problems until it was too late, until they didn't have enough of a runway, enough money to fix all those problems and get it back up on its feet. And so I say there were some things that pointed to failure from the beginning, but it wasn't going to happen for sure.
Yeah, and I agree with that as well. There were a lot with all of your points were great, that there were indicators that it wouldn't last. on the other side that were promising. But because of underdevelopment, rushing, not doing the right amount of research, like that ended up going into failure. But the idea of, I mean, he looked at social media and saw how social media was growing at the time, because it was still relatively new. I think even MySpace was still around back then. Like it was still relatively new. And so the idea to try and capture a new audience, I think was promising. But again, with all those things, there were those signs that were going to point to failure. And so I think that's ultimately what ended up happening. It just didn't develop it enough in the beginning to be able to see more success out of it in the end. Any other thoughts on any of that?
One thing that I was curious about, maybe you guys took a look at this, looking at the exhibits in the case, I don't really see where he got the idea to go from the social media platform about let's get these people connected and talking. There was definitely evidence behind people wanting advice, wanting to confirm their decisions with professionals, but was there anything that would have pointed him in the direction of the whole social media idea, or is that just something he came up with?
So the one thing that I did see in the case and not in the exhibits was he said that he believed that there was a social component based off of information that he saw from other communities, and he referenced, I think it was called Raging Bull, a community that I assume, because they didn't go into a lot of detail about it, but I assume it was people talking about investments. And so I think that's kind of what prompted his ideas. He saw social networking, and then he saw other smaller communities that were already discussing investments, things like that. And so that's, I think, drew him to the connection of, hey, let's put the two together. But again, like you said, I didn't see any evidence or enough research to indicate like this is going to be successful if I pair these two things.
Yeah, on page 2, it says, like, on that first paragraph, it says, by the end of 2005, Carpenter had examined and disregarded or discarded 4 different ideas and decided on a plan that leveraged social media to help individuals become better investors. So it looks like he researched a little bit, but probably could have done more, like planning and preparing to make that decision.
Did that answer the question then that you had, Nathan? Or are you
Yeah.
still trying to dig a little more?
Yeah, definitely.
So now we're going to talk a little bit about, it wants us to talk a little bit about the approach. And we all kind of, I think, feel like he didn't prepare enough for his idea to kind of really flesh it out to get something that was really workable. And there's some quotes that they want to share. Oh, it's even right here, where he talks about the Raging Bull thing. I guess it's on page 10. It says, there's no way, this is a quote from Stephen. He says, there's no way you could have learned this up front through interviews or focus groups. There are a lot of precedents pointing to a strong social component, including investment clubs and activities on site and active communities on sites like Raging Bull. So it says that, I guess, in talking about his failure of connecting the social aspect of it, that there were precedents, but not actual like strong evidence. And one of the things that I felt like was a mistake early on, and y'all may disagree, but this is something that I thought when they decided to go the route of going through the TechCrunch 40 and throwing away their beta that they were going to put out, like they were going to develop something, invite people to try it out, and then put out a public beta to then get more feedback. Instead, they scrapped that idea and just tried to get something workable for TechCrunch 40, which they did, which is very impressive. But I feel like if they had kind of put together a beta product, let people try it, test it out, they would have been able to see early on, hey, people aren't really getting in on this social component. And so what can we do to make, if we really want to stick with the social networking component, what do we need to change from our beta to our final product so that people are more social? Or are we going to pivot and get rid of the social component altogether. And so I think by scrapping those betas, they kind of they went straight to almost a final version, and they were so far into it at that point that it was too late for them to pivot. Did y'all see any other points or anything that y'all would have done differently, or that he should have done differently, that maybe might have changed the results of this venture?
Continuing on with what you're talking about with the no beta phases, later on that page 5, the second to last paragraph, it talks about how the visual design was unappealing. And it's like, come on, that's got to be one of the most basic things. It's got to be appealing to the eye. And when I read that, I was like, okay, no beta phase. It's not appealing to the eye. That's 2 red flags right there that you need to start throwing people on and start working and getting those things fixed if you want this product to be out there in the market and to have success in it.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Josh, what you were saying about the results of releasing the product at TechCrunch. So they had tens of thousands of people who came and viewed the website, but the fact that only like 3 to 5% signed up, that's hardly anybody. And so that should have been a major red flag for them there. Of course, the team spent most of their time working on the back end of the website, making sure that the service worked, the connections to the institutions worked out. When instead, kind of like Clayton was saying, you got to have a product that's appealing. You got to have something that's simple, that makes sense. And that's what Yodely, I think was what the competitor's name was called. That's something that they had on Cake Financial. And the problem was that they spent so much time on the back end that the product became so complicated that they couldn't make those changes in a timely manner. And so they ended up just taking hits month after month, while their competitor really gained a lot of users, had a more appealing interface.
Okay, thank you. Any thoughts on that, Madison?
I don't know. I was just kind of going to agree with you guys with the idea of like doing like some kind of practice round before, because once they were into the business, it was hard to see, like you don't see all the risks and you don't know all that's going to come and be hard, but something to like have a sample run before just like jumping into it and putting like all your money and hiring people into something is doing like sample runs. And even like with the unappealing design and everything, if they had done something where they had like different options and had some sort of like, I don't know, like some sort of vote, or tried to see like what, because that's something I don't know, I personally do. If I go on a website and it just looks unappealing and crazy, I'm like, oh, never mind, I'll go find a different website that can help me. And so I don't know, just having more of a practice round and getting more opinions before just jumping into it, making the final decisions of everything would have been really important.
Yeah, I agree with that. Thank you. Another thing that they talked about when they did the focus groups, another quote that they share from the case, Stephen says, in retrospect, talking about the focus groups, he says, I'm not sure that these early focus groups were very helpful. They validated our high-level concept, but we did not seek feedback on a specific product. I've learned that focus groups for technical products can be unreliable because people can't always say what they want until they actually see it and play around with it. We would have learned more by building a lightweight product and watching how investors used it. We also didn't get much sense of user segmentation from our early focus groups. Later, we learned that there are important but subtle differences between active investors who track their portfolios daily and mainstream investors who pay less attention. I think that just kind of goes along with what we were just saying, is that they had these really early focus groups before they had anything that they could test, anything that they could play with. And if they had focused on creating a beta and then going, hey, here, focus groups, try this out, tell us what you think, they would have been able to get a lot more feedback. And so that one of the suggestions that I think that they should have done is, like we were just talking about, create something appealing, something simple, and get people to try it out. And that could have been a lot more valuable to them than anything that they got out of the TechCrunch 40. Because like Nathan, like you said, 3 to 4% that were signing up from visitors, that is nothing. And retention's no good if you're only getting 3 to 4% to sign up. They're probably not sticking around and continuing to use the product at that point either. So any other thoughts on that? I know we're kind of just flying through this, or any other thoughts in general? No? Okay, so it says, as a group, identify the main reason for Cake's failure. And was the failure just beyond Steven's control, or was there more than that he could have done to avoid that? I guess we kind of talked about that a little bit, but any other thoughts on it?
I think going just with what we've been talking about, like you said, we've kind of went over it, is some of the failures were things with him not preparing and being ready in advance. And I think some of them are just risks that every business takes that you don't know if they'll come or not. So I think part of it is that he could have worked harder to prepare, and part of it was just things that were going to happen. And it was just how he reacted to the risks that occurred.
Thank you.
Yeah, and part of it deals with how he dealt with the situation that he was given. You know, things started to not work out. You know, what was his choice? Why did he choose that rather than that? And I think I wouldn't say there's one main reason for the failure, but I think there are a lot of little pieces that go into the failure. And I think some of them he could have fixed and he could have done better. And some of them were kind of out of his control. Like going into an unknown kind of mysterious market, that was kind of out of his control. That was the risk he was willing to take. But something like preparation and making his webpage look nicer, you know, that's some of the things that he could have done. So I think there's a nice little balance of things that he could have done and things that kind of just happened naturally.
I think finances were a major downfall for Steve Carpenter and his team. He made the comment after kind of his initial round of fundraising where he raised $2.8 million from one firm. He said that I knew that the firm I raised from would not be able to sustain the company alone since they only had a $100 million fund. And of course, they blew through it was like $300,000 a month, which is an incredible amount of money. Kind of in summary about that point, investor Steve Anderson, who kind of took an interest in the company, said that they took way too much money and time to figure out that males in their 40s and 50s didn't want to share investment information. The company burned through millions of dollars and built a big platform before it gained that insight. And so they were spending way too much money. And in the end, they didn't have the time to make the changes that could have made the company profitable. So they ended up just burning themselves out.
To add on to that real quick, they're spending $300,000 a month, right? And then their first revenue was when they brought forth Cake 3.0, and they made $30,000 after a few weeks after the launch. So just to kind of put that in comparative, you're spending $300,000 a month, and you're making at the best $30,000 a month.
Yeah, they definitely. I think it sounds like the consensus is they waited too long to realize these changes. If they had made that realization, Nathan, that you pointed out earlier, that males in their 40s and 50s don't want to share their information, their investment information. They just don't really care about what other people are doing. They're going to try and focus on it on their own. If they had done that early, like, because it seems like the final, the 3.0, Clayson, that you're just talking about, that they released, was the most simple feature out of all, or at least the most simple product out of all the ones that they had released previously. And if they had been able to identify that earlier on, then they could have avoided all those pitfalls along the way. And potentially had something that would have stuck around, and that he could have kept, that Steve Carpenter could have kept without having to sell, or maybe even making more off of the sale in the end. This last question I wanted to talk about, this was in our personal write-ups, asking if Cake was a good entrepreneurial failure for Steve Carpenter or not, or if you can have a good entrepreneurial failure. And I just wanted to say, I think any type of failure where you're able to gain information from, to learn from, can be good. Yeah, it can stink in the process while it's going on, but it can still end up being a good lessons learned from it. And it sounds like he did learn some lessons in his summary, in his little retrospect of what happened. So I think that it was a good failure for him, just based alone on information that he garnered from it. But what do y'all think about that? Was it good, bad, neutral? What do you think?
I agree with you on that one. Failure is good as long as you can learn from it, I think. And I think in this case, I don't know, I didn't really read anywhere or saw anywhere, but he didn't really go bankrupt. You know, he wasn't doing that great, but in the end, he was able to sell his company. And it doesn't specify, I don't think, how much he sold it for, or how much the assets sold for. But I think, you know, he was able to learn from the experience and not be completely devastated, but he's able to, you know, to fall down and pick himself back up again.
Yeah, I agree as well. Even like the case study starts with like him sitting in his apartment making his next plan. So from his failure, he was able to say, okay, this is what I did wrong and this is what I want to change. So at least he was able to take it and run with it with a new idea instead of just being like, well, I failed, never trying that again.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so I don't think there's anything else as far as what they ask us to discuss for the lesson, but do y'all have any other comments or questions that you want to go over about this case?
I think for me, I'm pretty good. I think we touched on most of the stuff that I wanted to touch on.
Yeah, that was perfect.
All right, and it looks like we lost Nathan,
Yeah.
but he was here and he participated when he was here, so
Yeah.
awesome. Okay, so then from here on out, after we end the meeting, I'll send y'all the link to the meeting. I know in the past post-discussion polls we had, or at least one of them, I had to submit the link as well to the actual video. So I'll send that to y'all right after I close this out, and then I'll post it to our discussion board as well. Don't know if that's required or not, but at least that way it's there if the instructor wants to look at that. And then on Friday, we'll plan on meeting at 2:30 Mountain Time, and we'll discuss the next case.
Sounds good.
All right. Thanks for participating, guys. We'll see y'all on Friday.
See ya.
Thank you.
Bye.